morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Got my requisite cup of coffee here with me. Actually, just the last little bit. I usually spend this last few minutes and these last few sips talking with you. Hope you're having a great week. I know it's a little shorter week because of the Memorial Day holiday, and I appreciate on this shorter week with a lot to do, you spending a few minutes with me. We are talking, as we always do, about the Gospel of Matthew. I shouldn't say always, most of the time, and have been for quite a while now. Meandering through the Gospel of Matthew, the story of the life of Jesus, his teachings, and we're really getting toward the end. And I know it feels, I've been saying that for a long time, but we're getting close. Kind of this last block of teaching, really, from Jesus. We're kind of in the middle of that. We're at the end of chapter 23, and here's where he's going to turn his attention just briefly away from the religious leaders specifically, and he has this moment of lament over the city of Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often he says this lovingly, I've longed to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. Jesus having this moment saying he wished the people of Israel would turn in faith to him. But as we will find out, even in the story over the next several chapters, Jesus will not have that experience, though he has great love and compassion for them. And then he kind of says this, which is really what I want to talk about today. He says, look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That last part you may be familiar with. We've heard these words already in Matthew's account. We'll get back to that in just a minute. But what does he mean? Look, your house is left to you desolate. Well, when he turns his attention to the city itself, probably the most well-known and at that time the most dominating feature of the city is the temple itself. The temple that sat up on the hill of kind of the highest point of the city of Jerusalem as he's coming in from the Mount of Olives. It's on the eastern side of the city where the temple is. And so as he's coming into the city, when he came the triumphal entry, that would be the dominating thing he would see. And it dominated really, especially in that day, because Jerusalem was a much smaller city than if you've been in recent history. You know, it's pretty sprawling. It's a rather large metropolis. It wouldn't have been that in Jesus' day. And the centerpiece of that city is the temple. And one of the things, one of the titles, one of the ways people referred to the temple, even the tabernacle before, was the house of the Lord, or the house of Yahweh, the house of the Lord. And so when Jesus says, look, your house is left to you desolate, I think what he has in mind is that temple. And we could also, by implication, say maybe even the religious leaders who are leading the people away from what Jesus is calling them to. Maybe even Jesus had in mind Ezekiel's vision. This goes back to the exile 400 or 500 years before, when Israel is in Babylon, and Ezekiel is the prophet there, and he has this vision of Jerusalem in Ezekiel 10 and 11, and what he sees is remarkable, that the very presence of God leaves the temple. The temple is thought to be the place where God dwelt with and among Israel, going way back to God tells him, I want you to build a tabernacle so that I can live among you. It was this place where he was thought to dwell, and Ezekiel sees through a vision the glory and the Spirit of God leaving the Holy of Holies and leaving the temple itself and going to the gate of the city before it goes to the mountain to the east, the Mount of Olives, and is gone. And so Ezekiel has this vision. And for the most unimaginable thing to happen for Israel, that would be it, that God no longer is with them. Ezekiel sees it. And maybe Jesus had that in mind. But what we know happens just a couple of decades, 3 or 4 decades after Jesus speaks these words, is when that physical structure also becomes desolate, because Rome sieges the city of Jerusalem and eventually destroys the temple, so that all that's left now are a little bit of it. You can go the Wailing Wall and that sorts of things, that they destroy the temple. And truly it is a desolate house. Maybe Jesus has that in mind, and he ties that idea back to this quote from Psalms 118, where he said, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, I said we've heard that before. That was quoted, Matthew 21 is the triumphal entry. And they quote Psalm 118, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, as Jesus is coming into the city. And here he says, you won't see me again until you say. And what I think he's setting up is the contrast between the first time we see this passage in this book where people are crying it out, but they're crying it out for a very particular reason. They want Jesus, as many did in that day, to be the conquering hero, to liberate them from Roman oppression and reestablish Israel, the nation of Israel, as its king. That was their mind. Now we know, because we have the benefit of history and theology to look back at this, that wasn't Jesus' intent. He didn't come to establish Israel as a nation. He came for a spiritual reason, which why the house being desolate isn't just the physical structure. It's the fact that God is no longer there because the people have rejected him. But by the way, rejected, that is another quote Jesus makes also in Matthew 21 and also in Psalm 118. Because in Matthew 21:42, Jesus mentions that in that same psalm, Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone or the capstone. The Lord has done this and it is marvelous in our eyes. And so Psalm 118 that he references here, yes, talks about his triumphal entry, and I think implicitly points to the future time when he will return in his glory, that second coming we often talk about as Christians, but also reminds the people in that moment of that entire psalm that pointed to Jesus who would be rejected. And we'll see this happen in short order in Matthew's account of his life in the next few chapters. He's arrested, he's tried, he's brutalized, and eventually crucified. He is rejected, but it's the stone the builders rejected that becomes the chief cornerstone, and God raises him from the dead. Miraculously, he comes back to life, validating all that he is and all that he came to do to provide for salvation. And so Jesus, as the chief cornerstone, comes not for desolation, but for salvation. And what we find, and if we want to make that spiritualized kind of connection there, sin desolates. Just like the presence of God couldn't stay in the temple because of the sin of the people, sin desolates in our life. But because of who Jesus is, he comes and he can become that chief cornerstone, that building block of forgiveness, not of a physical temple, because I don't think what he's saying here and referencing in Matthew 21:42 as he quotes Psalm 118 is talking about one day we're going to rebuild this temple. I know there's a lot of end times prophecy that talk about that. I don't think that's the greatest thing that Jesus is hinting at here. I think what he's saying is he becomes the key to building not a physical house, but a spiritual house that is a people. Because elsewhere in the New Testament we learn what? That we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And the chief cornerstone that allows us to become that is placing faith in Jesus. Quoting words much like this, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, recognizing who Jesus was and what he did. He perfectly represented, he perfectly demonstrated the character and the love and the hope and the justice and the mercy of God, so that when we believe in him and see him as God who has come to us, we can receive that salvation that takes the desolation that sin has caused in our life and rebuilds us into a house. We become living stones, as later in the New Testament we're told this. We become a temple of the Holy Spirit, another later quote. And so Jesus comes to do that. It is a kind of a hint, an implicit hint at what ultimately he will do when he returns and sets right every wrong. But it's also an invitation that Jesus says, you will not see me again until you say. We cannot have that relationship with God again that was intended when we were created in his image, that was lived out in the first days of the garden, until we see that Jesus is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, who comes as God in the flesh, and who provides by his death, by being rejected through crucifixion and being resurrected on that first Easter that we've just celebrated, as the chief cornerstone, as the foundation of our life of faith that brings forgiveness, that brings grace, that brings new life. I hope you know Jesus as the chief cornerstone of your life, that faith in him has brought forgiveness. That's what we talk about all the time, how you can do that and what it means to live a life based upon that kind of chief cornerstone of Jesus. I usually invite you, and I'll do it again. Love to have you join us Sundays, 9 a.m. We're meandering through an earlier part of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. We're getting toward the end, toward the conclusion of that. We're going to be talking about that just this Sunday. Love to have you join us, 9 a.m. We'll be right here. I always appreciate you spending a few minutes with me on Wednesday. Well, I am going to let you get back to it. It's a big day in our community, high school graduation tonight. Maybe you've got a graduate or someone you know graduating. Certainly want to celebrate with those families and pray for those who start that next chapter of life. We're hoping to go down there, and we have a few people we know and care a lot about that are graduating. So maybe we'll see you down there, but I hope for sure we'll see you on Sunday or maybe next Wednesday as we do a little chit chat over my cup. Almost dropped it over my cup of coffee. Take care, everybody.